Jenny.
Hey, thanks, Ree.
Share your screen.
And thanks for your presentation, Lou. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to give this a go. Has the right screen popped up, Ree?
Yep.
Yep, great.
Good.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for inviting me to talk at the webinar. I'm Jenny. I've been working at Hunter Local Land Services for about the last 8 years in the Hunter River and Estuary, and prior to that worked at Fisheries working on habitat rehabilitation projects in rivers in both the inland and the coast. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Worimi and Awabakal peoples as the traditional custodians of the land through which the Lower Hunter River flows and where we've completed our project, and also extend my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Today I'm going to be presenting a case study of the use of timber and revegetation to promote riverbank stability in the Hunter Estuary. After a couple of introductory slides, I'll be showing a 5-minute video and a few more slides after that. So I hope if we have any Victorians in the crowd who are stuck down in lockdown, maybe it's a bit of a respite, taking a little tour of the mighty Hunter River. And I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues, Guy Lampert and Dan Love, and their team from Soil Conservation Service who are involved in delivering this project. Sorry, my screen seems to have paused for a sec. There we go. Yeah, okay. So our site's on the Hunter Estuary, approximately 30 kilometres upstream of Newcastle, the New South Wales coast. The red star indicates the location of our project site. So by way of background, the Hunter Estuary has more than 200 kilometres of riverbanks within the tidally influenced section of the river. And a range of impacts lead to poor bank condition, like historic clearing of riparian vegetation, unrestricted stock access, wind and boat waves, and these have all led to reduced resilience in the riverbank to be able to withstand the daily forces and floods. So this photo on the left there, typical bank condition in the Lower Hunter. It's really struggling, unrestricted cattle access and some ongoing erosion issues. We also have a large-scale flood mitigation scheme constructed after the floods in the 1940s and 50s. And the scheme includes floodgates and levees, which line the riverbanks and sort of impact our ability to rehabilitate riparian areas with vegetation. There's sometimes just not enough space between the river and the levee. So Soil Conservation Service conducted a review of bank stability risks in the Hunter Valley Flood Mitigation Scheme infrastructure in 2018, and their study showed us that 30% of riverbanks of the total 210 kilometres assessed showed signs of instability and ongoing bank retreat. So we've had the opportunity to work on a site at Miller's Forest, which has active bank erosion, and importantly, a landholder who is also willing to change his farming methods. So in the photo there, again on the left, taken at low tide in 2017, you can see vertical, sometimes undercut banks with an intertidal bench suited to the techniques of erosion control to promote the natural regeneration of mangroves. So when this landholder first approached us, he noticed mangroves were trying to take root, but they'd be washed away before they managed to establish. So it's tidal here, and a tidal range of about 1.5 metres. The bench you can see below the sheer bank, it goes underwater at high tide. So our project goals were to manage the erosion, which was leading to agricultural land loss and of course water quality impacts. We want to promote revegetation, so the deep-rooted native plants to provide the long-term stability and improve riverine environmental outcomes. It's well known that native fish use timber as in-stream habitat, and timber provides the building blocks for the aquatic food web. And I feel like I might be talking to a well and truly converted crowd here with RBMS, who I'm sure you all appreciate the value of timber in Australian rivers. We wanted to develop a new method and provide a working example of the use of timber in an estuarine environment. As I mentioned, in the Hunter River, it had been very rock focused up until now. That's not true. There were some other small projects, but we're just looking at doing it slightly differently. We wanted to compare costs of works with other traditional methods, and I'll briefly talk about a couple of those now. So rock revetment, it was the go-to option for bank stabilisation in past government-funded river management programs in the Hunter. The primary goal was to protect assets, some of which may or may not be well situated adjacent to dynamic riverbanks, but no doubt rock revetment does stop erosion. However, the Hunter Estuary now has 76 kilometres of the stuff. It's a high cost, so current value, you know, $1,000 to $2,000 per lineal metre. And also some unintended impacts, like effectively channelizing the river in places, defecting flows, and inhibiting vegetation growth. So we acknowledge that rock revetment may still be necessary where it protects high value assets like levees, and it may be a public expectation for high use waterfronts areas like recreational parks. But unfortunately, it's now also an expectation of some landholders in the Hunter who are maybe a bit more unwilling to change their land management practices because they think the government will just come and fix it if it gets too bad. And then rock fillets, for those of you unfamiliar, they're rock walls placed offset to the bank up to the mean high watermark level and suitable for tidal areas. They provide small protected embayments for mangroves and reeds to establish. And in the last 10 years, rock fillets have been installed at least 3 locations in the Hunter Estuary and also in many other New South Wales estuaries. They've proven successful in at least 2 Hunter sites, as reported by Mick Taylor, who presented his results in the Coastal Conference in 2017. And then there's also examples of rock fillets, sort of hybrid rock fillets that incorporate timber root balls on the North Coast estuaries. And that was again presented at the 2017 Coastal Conference by John Smith. So if you're interested in learning more about rock fillets, there's some papers on the New South Wales Coastal Conference site. So that brings me to our project using timber logs and revegetation to improve the bank stability. We wanted to take the principles of rock fillets and use timber instead of rock. We had a local source of hardwood timber from approved clearing, from road developments, housing subdivisions, and pivot irrigation systems. We developed a methodology based on characteristics of the site, which has an intertidal bench, as I've mentioned. And the project sought to promote revegetation as the ultimate goal for bank stability. So I'll put the video on now. Hopefully it plays. Rhiannon, shout out if it doesn't start playing, please. Clicking,
Not
clicking,
playing for us
clicking.
yet.
Yeah, it's not quite happening, is it? Oh, that's a bummer. Hope you don't mind if I just jump out of the screen sharing mode.
Go for it.
Dang, it can't play it. I have a backup plan. Just bear with me for a sec. Apologies, everyone.
I guess while people are waiting, if they can think of any questions that they'd like to ask, or if you have any other questions for Lou. Actually, we had one question here, Lou, that I could ask you. I'll ask you in between. So, are your findings influencing riparian revegetation activities in known turtle breeding areas, given your knowledge of the types of habitat that they like to inhabit?
I'm a bit reluctant to influence the revegetation methods because, as you saw, the banks were pretty eroded and pugged and bare, basically. Quite horrendous conditions, some of them. Yeah, so no, aside from local land services fencing off some areas, and they do have revegetation programs as well, no, the Turtle Project so far hasn't influenced revegetation. But I would hate to see revegetation stuff stop. I'd just like to see it incorporate a couple of bare areas for turtles, but yeah, I'd still like to see the banks remain intact.
Thanks, Lou.
All right. Sorry, should I put it
Jenny?
on now? Sorry.
Yep, we just heard it.
This site's on the Hunter River estuary, so we're just downstream of where the Williams River joins the Hunter River around Raymond Terrace. And the property owner here, Andrew Redriff, contacted us in the early days of our project to gain advice on how he could manage his riverbanks and prevent erosion continuing. I asked experts from Soil Conservation Service to visit the site to give an opinion on erosion control methods that might be suitable for this site.
One of the requirements that local land services had for this project was to trial new or different materials to deliver the desired outcome.
And I wanted to try something a bit more environmentally sensitive than rock revetment.
The issue with rock revetment is that it doesn't offer that sheltered environment which will help the mangroves establish. One of the challenges that this site experiences that is different to other sites, it's tidal here, and so we get water moving in both an upstream and downstream direction. So the design of the structure has to accommodate for that so that we can protect the riverbank from tidal currents. But also in this environment, we're dealing with large bodies of water where wind speeds can generate quite significant wave heights on the riverbank as well. So we have to be able to protect the riverbank from wind waves coming from a wide variety of angles. So what we came up with was to trial this log wall structure where we use reclaimed timber from approved clearing and recover that material and put it on the riverbank to protect it from further erosion. That helps to reduce the wave energy that's impacting the riverbank and provide a sheltered environment behind the log wall that will facilitate the recruitment of mangrove and salt marsh species, but primarily mangroves that will help with their roots to hold the riverbank together.
The timber is expected to stay in place while the mangroves and trees establish, and in the long run provide a stable, healthy riverbank.
In order to build the wall, first we have to find a supply of logs. We have those logs delivered to site. Using a 27-tonne excavator, we then can place those logs on the riverbank. The way we do that, the excavator has a grab bucket attachment. We then place footer logs parallel to the riverbank but offset from the riverbank. After that, we use 5-metre timber pins driven into the mud in pairs at each end of the footer logs, and we then drill and thread through galvanised round bar that is twisted around each of the pins and wound around itself, so that then secures all of the footer logs and the top logs in position. The top logs are generally placed in a crisscross fashion to not only break up the wave energy, but to build it up to the required height that we need to protect the riverbank. So we need to get above the high water mark of the river. So far we've completed 3 stages of this project. We were here completing stage 2 this time last year. So in the 12 months since, we have seen a significant recruitment and growth of mangroves from last season's seed drop.
So we found this technique using timber logs has been really successful at this site. It helps to trap mangrove seeds. It also helps prevent some of the eroding bank from washing out into the river, so improved water quality results. This method also uses a source of materials that would otherwise be burnt or wood chipped, so it's a good cheap source of materials. And the fact we're planting and fencing behind the riverbank makes it a more holistic project. So we found the use of timber in bank stabilisation to be quite a cost-effective method and showing great signs of success at this site. We're hoping that more and more often there'll be alternative riverbank management techniques trialled and put into place, and in the end it'll lead to healthier rivers in New South Wales.
It's been a pleasure to be involved with this project and try a new technique that is innovative and something that potentially could pave the way for a new technique that can be adopted right across the state.
Okay, thanks for watching. I'll just jump back into my PowerPoint presentation now, if PowerPoint decides it wants to toe the line. Sometimes it just takes a little second to go into slideshow mode. There you go. All right, is that looking good on the screen? Okay, so since we filmed the video last year, the revegetation works.
Well, we've owned this property for 23 years. It's 80 acres, and it's around about a
video running in the background here, so I'll just turn that off so I can concentrate. All right. Good old YouTube comes to the rescue yet again. All right, so since we filmed the video, we've planted 1,400 tube stock along 700 metres of the riverbank. So I think that's a really good result. I'd like to acknowledge the effort of the landholders, the Red Roof family, and there's Andrew in the photo there. No, he's not in the photo, he's in the next slide, sorry. So we've got a written agreement detailing the landholders' ongoing maintenance responsibilities to look after the revegetation and fencing, and so far they're doing a great job watering, weeding and checking on plant survival rates. And we've got another video including an interview with him on our LLS YouTube page if you'd like to have a look. Oh, there he is. So we held planting days involving the community and fishing club members and volunteers like Work for the Dole. And planting days I think are really worthwhile. There's always interesting conversations about wider river management issues and its opportunity to talk about current best practice and riverbank management. And it's a whole other conversation about riparian widths in that video you might have seen. It's not an extensive riparian width we've able to achieve at this site, but it's all we could negotiate given that it's not a large farm and the floodplain alluvial soils do grow high value feed for the stock. The landholders of the Hunter are very wary about fencing off in inverted commas, and that's due to perceptions of lost agricultural land, weed management and the risk of losing fences to floods. But then they also don't like to see their soil eroding or their cattle falling into the river. So I'd suggest for those of you embarking on riparian re-veg projects, try and be a bit flexible and consider you know, spruiking in particular desirable outcomes for farmers' point of view rather than just the environmental gains. For example, you know, a fenced riparian area can be crash grazed once the vegetation is re-established. I think also it would be good if we stopped calling it fencing off and considered it another management unit of the farm. So what did we learn from this project? Timber compared with rock provides a cheaper material, a better aquatic habitat, more natural and less permanent. You can see in the photo that the timber is helping the mangroves establish, whereas they'd previously washed away when they were about this size. We've developed a new method of using timber in estuaries and what size of timber is most useful, how to place it and secure it. That's not to say there's not other projects around using timber in estuaries. We're promoting the outcomes to other landholders and river management agencies. We'll be monitoring this site for its stability of the structures, especially following floods. We've had a minor flood over it so far, and we've found that as well as trapping mangrove seeds, it can also be good at trapping thongs and basketballs and other types of floating debris. We don't imagine that the timber will last as long as the rock, but we see that as an advantage because of the in-stream and upper bank vegetation will do the longer term job, hopefully. So the cost, using locally sourced timber can be cheaper and quicker to install than quarried rock. The total cost depends on the scale of your project. In the case of this project, we did over three or four stages. You know, the distance you transport timber can increase your cost of a project. So we capped it at about 100 to 200 kilometres. Seeking your timber sources early, so get to know clearing contractors and local council planning staff. The planning stages of a river rehab project are quite time consuming. All riverine works in New South Wales require an environmental assessment, which is a good thing. So we've prepared a review of environmental factors and consulted Fisheries Local Council, Crown Lands, local Aboriginal lands councils, and the Roads and Maritime Service. We sought funds for this project in stages, which helped to get it underway. And the construction, like I mentioned, has been done over 4 stages. As the timber became available, we didn't have enough timber to start with. And it's unlikely we would have achieved the total budget for this project in one go. So I think, you know, planning it in a staged approach was a good thing. And the funds from this project primarily came from the Hunter catchment contribution, which is a levy charged to Hunter landholders for flood mitigation and catchment improvement works. And we also received a $40,000 New South Wales Fisheries Habitat Action Grant, plus of course the landholders' in-kind contribution for weeding and watering plants. So that's it from me. There's our contact details for myself and my two colleagues from Soil Conservation Service. So please feel free to get in touch if you're interested in any more details about this project or anything else we've got going in the Hunter catchment. Thanks for listening.
All right, thanks for that, Jenny.
And thanks for the mid-presentation save, Rhiannon, that was great.
No worries. Does anybody have any questions out there for Jenny? We've got one here from Alice. She said, you said riparian vegetation, revegetation is a touchy issue with landowners in the Hunter. What did the other surrounding landholders think of your project now that you can show how successful it was?
That's a really good question. I think, yeah, you win some and you lose some. So if you sort of take on that approach from the beginning, not everyone in your catchment of interest is going to be interested at the very beginning, but I think like you will have one or two or more, hopefully, landholders that are willing to try something new. And, you know, if they become the catchment champion of the new project idea and they're willing to show their neighbours or have field days on their place, it's, you know, it just takes time. But I think once people, for those people who need to see it, to understand it over time, yeah, we're getting more Hunter estuary landholders interested in revegetation along the riverbank. I think they can see, I mean, this isn't the first, certainly not the first project to do re-veg in the lower Hunter, and there are some that are sort of 30 and 40 years old, and so you can see along those stretches, I mean, it's aesthetically pleasing and you know, less likely to be actively eroding. So yeah, just showing people I think is one of the best tools.
Excellent, thanks for that, Jenny. I actually cut out halfway through your presentation, so apologies if this question has been answered. Oh, we've also got another one here from Dan. He said, your presentation is very interesting. Wondering if there is an ongoing commitment to monitor the pilot study to quantify improvements in water quality or bank stability. This might help in winning minds. That's a good.
Yeah, it could well do. We were really lucky. Melbourne Uni decided to do some research on rock fillets, and then they incorporated our site using timber into their research as well. And so they've had an initial site visit. This was all pre-COVID, of course. Having a look at, you know, taking measurements over time, amount of sediment accumulation and vegetation success. And we're also monitoring it ourselves with, you know, photo points and plant survival rates and those sorts of things. As far as monitoring water quality, sometimes it's a little bit tricky to determine, you know, your pretty small scale projects contribution to an enormous estuary's water quality, but they do, we do have estuary water quality monitoring in the lower Hunter. And so hopefully over time, with all our range of riparian re-veg projects, we'll hopefully see improvements. But, you know, down at the bottom of the system, where our water quality is a function of everything that's happening in the entire catchment upstream. So yeah, I guess, you know, it's going to be poor after floods. It's going to be good when there's, you know, moderate inflows or high tides. Yeah, it's pretty variable.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Jenny.